January 22nd, 1879. 12:30 p.m. Isandlwana, Zululand. Lieutenant Tangmouth Melville stands frozen, watching the impossible unfold before his eyes. The red line is breaking. For 70 years, the British Army has built an empire on a simple premise. Disciplined infantry, armed with modern rifles, can defeat any number of native warriors. Thin red lines holding against overwhelming odds. Volley fire, bayonets, the certainty of European military superiority. That certainty dies today in the shadow of a sphinx-shaped mountain. 20,000 Zulu warriors sweep across the plain in a formation so vast, so perfectly coordinated, that it seems less like a military maneuver and more like a force of nature. They move in the classic horns of the bull formation, the chest charging straight at the British camp, the left and right horns curving to encircle it, and the reserve loins waiting behind to exploit any breakthrough. The sound is unlike anything the British soldiers have ever heard. Not a wild charge, but a rhythmic chanting. Usuthu, Usuthu. The Zulu war cry, synchronized with the stamping of 20,000 feet. The ground itself seems to vibrate. The very air thrums with the approach of doom. Melville watches British soldiers fire volley after volley into the advancing mass. Zulu warriors fall, dozens, then hundreds, but the formation doesn't break, doesn't slow. For every warrior who falls, 10 more step over his body. The horns are extending now, beginning their deadly embrace of the British position. And then Melville sees something that turns his blood to ice. British soldiers are running out of ammunition. The quartermasters, in a bureaucratic decision that will doom 1,300 men, have packed the ammunition in sealed wooden boxes secured with copper bands and screws. Opening each box requires tools and time that the soldiers in the firing line don't have. Men are screaming for ammunition. The boxes pile up behind the lines, sealed coffins of brass and lead that might as well be empty. The Zulu horns close, warriors armed with short stabbing spears, the ikowa, named for the sucking sound it makes when withdrawn from flesh, pour into the British camp. What began as an ordered defense dissolves into desperate, close-quarters carnage. Melville, clutching the Queen's colour of the 24th Regiment, the sacred battle flag that must never fall into enemy hands, mounts his horse and rides for his life toward the Buffalo River, 5 miles distant. Behind him, the British camp transforms into an abattoir. The morning began with imperial confidence. It ends with the worst defeat inflicted on the British Army by an indigenous force in colonial history. This is the Anglo-Zulu War. 6 months of conflict that will see incredible courage on both sides, tactical brilliance and catastrophic blunders, and ultimately the destruction of an independent African kingdom by the British Empire. This is the story of when 2 military systems, one built on industrial might and disciplined firepower, the other on speed, courage, and the spear, collided in southern Africa. And for one terrible day at least, the spears won. The Imperial Commander, Lieutenant General Frederick Augustus Thesiger, 2nd Baron Chelmsford, is a professional soldier from Britain's aristocratic military class. At 51 years old, he served in the Crimean War, in India during the Mutiny, and in various colonial campaigns in Africa. He's methodical, by the book, and utterly convinced of British military superiority. Tall, with impressive mutton-chop whiskers and the bearing of a man accustomed to command, Chelmsford views his mission in straightforward terms. Invade Zululand, defeat King Cetshwayo's forces, and bring the Zulu kingdom under British control. He has modern rifles, artillery, and the weight of the British Empire behind him. The Zulus have spears. How difficult could it be? This assumption, this fundamental underestimation of his enemy, will haunt Chelmsford for the rest of his life. He approaches the invasion with confidence bordering on arrogance, dividing his force into 3 columns that will advance into Zululand simultaneously, expecting to provoke the Zulu army into a pitched battle where British firepower will annihilate them. He never imagines that it might be his own force that faces annihilation. The Zulu king Cetshwayo Kampande sits on the throne of a kingdom forged by his uncle, the legendary Shaka Zulu, 50 years earlier. He's approximately 53 years old, a large man with a commanding presence, intelligent and politically astute. He's navigated the complex politics of the Zulu royal house to claim the throne, and he understands the threat that British expansion poses to his kingdom's independence. But Cetshwayo doesn't want war. He's watched the British expand their control across southern Africa, absorbing or destroying every African kingdom that resists them. He's seen what happened to the Xhosa, the Sotho, and countless other peoples. He knows that his warriors, no matter how brave, face an enemy with resources he cannot match. For years, Cetshwayo has pursued a careful diplomatic balance, maintaining Zulu independence while avoiding direct confrontation with the British. He's modernized some aspects of Zulu society, established trade relationships, and tried to present himself as a reasonable monarch with whom the British can deal. It won't be enough. The Zulu military system, inherited from Shaka, is formidable. Every able-bodied man serves in age-graded regiments called Amabutho. These warriors train from youth in warfare, live in military barracks when called up, and fight with a discipline and tactical sophistication that European observers consistently underestimate. The Zulu don't simply charge mindlessly at their enemies. They employ complex battlefield tactics, reconnaissance, strategic deception, and a command structure that allows for coordinated maneuvers by thousands of warriors. The Army Cetshwayo can field numbers approximately 35,000 to 40,000 warriors. They're armed primarily with the Ikalwa stabbing spear and Isilangu cowhide shield, though some have firearms, mostly outdated muskets and rifles acquired through trade. Their true weapons are speed, courage, physical conditioning, and tactical doctrine refined over decades of warfare. Cetshwayo knows his warriors are brave. He knows they've never been defeated by an African enemy, but he also knows they've never faced the concentrated firepower of a modern European army. He will soon learn what that firepower can do and what happens when it fails. The young Lieutenant Neville Josiah Aylmer Coghill of the 24th Regiment of Foot is 26 years old, the son of a baronet born into the comfortable world of Victorian privilege. He's been in South Africa for only a few months, one of hundreds of junior officers serving in Britain's endless colonial campaigns. He keeps a diary, writes letters home to his family in Ireland, and approaches military service with the mixture of duty and adventure common to young officers of his class. On January 22nd, 1879, Coghill will perform an act of such desperate courage that he'll be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, though it will take 28 years for the award to be granted. The delay caused by the fact that he dies trying to save the Queen's colour rather than in direct combat with the enemy. But on this January morning, Coghill simply tries to survive. Mehloka Zulu Kasihayo is in his early 30s, a warrior of the Unokenke regiment and son of a Zulu chief. He's fought in border skirmishes and cattle raids, but this will be his first battle against the British. Like most Zulu warriors, he's been trained in warfare since adolescence, taught to run 50 miles in a day, to fight with a short stabbing spear at close quarters, to maintain formation discipline even under fire. Mehloka Zulu doesn't want this war either. He understands that the British are powerful, that they've conquered vast territories, that they possess weapons that can kill at distances far beyond a thrown spear. But he's also a Zulu warrior, and when his king calls, he marches. The Zulu don't fight for conquest or plunder in this war. They fight for their kingdom's survival, for their right to live as they have lived, free from British control. This gives them a motivation that British soldiers, fighting for imperial expansion and a paycheck, cannot match. Rorke Zulu will survive this war and live to old age, one of the last warriors of the old Zulu kingdom. In his later years, he'll speak to historians about the battles he witnessed, providing invaluable Zulu perspective on events that British sources described only from their side. His testimony will reveal what British accounts often obscured: that the Zulu fought with intelligence, courage, and tactical skill, not as savage hordes, but as disciplined soldiers defending their homeland. The Anglo-Zulu War doesn't begin with a legitimate grievance or unavoidable conflict. It begins with imperial ambition and bureaucratic scheming. Sir Henry Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner for Southern Africa, has a vision: a confederation of southern African states under British control, similar to Canada. This confederation would include the British colonies of the Cape and Natal, the Boer republics of the Transvaal and Orange Free State, and the remaining independent African kingdoms, including Zululand. There's one problem. Most of these states don't want confederation. The Boers certainly don't, and Cetshwayo's Zulu kingdom, powerful and independent, represents the largest obstacle to Frere's plans. Frere decides that the Zulu kingdom must be broken. The British government in London, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, has specifically instructed Frere to avoid war in southern Africa. Britain is dealing with crises in Afghanistan and potential conflict with Russia. The last thing London wants is another expensive colonial war. Frere will give them one anyway. On December 11, 1878, British officials deliver an ultimatum to Zulu representatives at a meeting near the lower Tugela River. The terms are read out in elaborate detail, and they're clearly designed to be unacceptable. The British demand that Cetshwayo disband his army within 30 days, that the Zulu military system be dismantled entirely, that Zulu men be allowed to marry without the king's permission, a fundamental change to Zulu social organization, that British residents and missionaries be allowed to operate freely throughout Zululand, that certain Zulu chiefs who've committed offenses against British subjects be surrendered for trial, payment of cattle as fines for various border incidents. Professor Martin Klein of the University of Cape Town explains the ultimatum's purpose. Frere knew these terms were impossible for Cetshwayo to accept. The Zulu military system wasn't just an army, it was the foundation of Zulu society, politics, and identity. Asking Cetshwayo to disband it within 30 days was like asking Britain to dissolve Parliament. The ultimatum was designed to provoke war, not prevent it. Cetshwayo tries desperately to negotiate. He offers to pay the cattle fines. He suggests compromises on some issues. He asks for more time to consult with his counselors. He does everything except surrender his kingdom's independence. It's not enough. Frere has already decided on war. Lord Chelmsford has already assembled his invasion force. The invasion force. Chelmsford commands approximately 17,000 men divided into 5 columns, though 3 will conduct the actual invasion. The force includes 6,600 British regular infantry, 1,000 colonial volunteers, 9,000 African auxiliaries, mostly from tribes hostile to the Zulus. Artillery and engineer supply trains with hundreds of wagons. The British soldiers carry the Martini Henry rifle, a powerful, single-shot breech-loading weapon with an effective range of 400 yards and the ability to fire 10 to 12 aimed shots per minute in the hands of a trained soldier. Each man carries 70 rounds of ammunition, with hundreds more in reserve. The plan is straightforward. 3 columns will invade Zululand simultaneously from different directions, converging on the Zulu capital of Ulundi. The Zulus will be forced to fight or see their capital captured. When they fight, British firepower will destroy them. Colonial warfare, Victorian style. On January 11, 1879, ignoring frantic messages from London ordering him to delay, Chelmsford orders the invasion to begin. 3 columns cross into Zululand. King Cetshwayo's last attempts at peace have failed. Now he must fight. January 22nd, 1879. The center column. Chelmsford's center column, which he personally commands, advances cautiously into Zululand. It consists of approximately 4,700 men, 1,800 British regulars and colonial troops, plus 2,500 African auxiliaries. They're accompanied by over 200 wagons carrying supplies, ammunition, and equipment. Progress is slow. The terrain is difficult, rolling hills, rocky ridges, and deep ravines. The wagons struggle. After 11 days of marching, the column has advanced only 10 miles from the border. On the morning of January 22nd, Chelmsford makes a decision that will haunt him forever. Receiving reports of Zulu forces to the southeast, he splits his force. He takes approximately 2,500 men and marches toward the reported enemy position, leaving about 1,300 men to guard the camp established at the foot of Isandlwana mountain. The camp sits in an exposed position on open ground. Chelmsford hasn't ordered it fortified. No earthworks, no laager of wagons forming a defensive perimeter, nothing. He doesn't expect the Zulus to attack such a large force directly. The Zulus, he believes, will avoid pitched battles and must be hunted down. He's catastrophically wrong. While Chelmsford chases phantoms to the southeast, 20,000 Zulu warriors lie hidden in a valley just 5 miles from Isandlwana camp. They've been there since the previous night, concealed in the tall grass and broken ground, waiting for the right moment to attack. The Zulu commanders don't want to fight today. In Zulu religious tradition, the moon is wrong, the battle should wait. But a British scouting party accidentally discovers the hidden army. The warriors, their concealment compromised, rise as one from the grass. The horns of the bull begin to move. Meloka Zulu Chelmsford, crouched in the grass with his regiment, feels his heart pounding as the order to advance ripples through the ranks. Around him, thousands of warriors stand, their shields creating a wall of cowhide and their spears catching the sunlight. The British camp lies visible in the distance, a sprawl of white tents beneath the distinctive mountain. Usuthu! Usuthu! The war cry begins, building from a murmur to a roar as 20,000 voices join. They advance at a run, not a disorganized sprint, but a coordinated jog that eats ground rapidly while maintaining formation. The Zulu can sustain this pace for miles. They'll hit the British camp like a tsunami. In the British camp, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pauline commands the remaining force. He's a capable administrator, but has never commanded troops in combat. When vedettes, mounted scouts, bring reports of massive Zulu forces approaching, Pauline deploys his troops in extended firing lines, the standard British defensive formation. Approximately 600 British soldiers of the 24th Regiment of Foot form a line roughly 1,000 yards in front of the camp. They're joined by several hundred colonial and African troops. It's a dangerously extended position, the men spread too thin, but it's designed to maximize firepower. The Martini Henry rifles open fire at extreme range, 800 yards. The heavy, .577 caliber bullets tear into the Zulu ranks. Warriors fall, their shields no protection against such weapons. But the formation doesn't break. The Zulus advance into a storm of lead. British soldiers fire as fast as they can. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. The rifle's breech mechanism grows hot. Spent cartridges pile at the soldiers' feet. The noise is deafening. Hundreds of rifles firing in a continuous crackle. Artillery pieces booming. Orders shouted. Wounded men screaming. Still the Zulus come. Private Henry Hook, a 28-year-old soldier from Gloucestershire, fires until his shoulder aches from the rifle's recoil. He can see individual warriors now, their faces, their decorations, the patterns on their shields. He fires at a warrior carrying a white shield with black spots. The man falls. Another warrior steps over the body. Hook fires again. The Zulu casualties are horrific. Perhaps 1,000 warriors fall in the first 15 minutes of the battle. But the British line is too extended, the troops too spread out. Gaps appear. The Zulu horns, each consisting of 5,000 or 7,000 warriors, begin to wrap around the British flanks. The battle turns on ammunition. British soldiers, firing rapidly to stem the Zulu advance, exhaust their immediate supply. They send runners back to the ammunition wagons. The quartermasters, following regulations, insist on issuing ammunition only to soldiers from the same regiment. The wooden boxes must be opened properly, with tools, following procedure. Even as their comrades die, the quartermasters maintain bureaucratic control. Soldiers at the firing line scream for ammunition. Some boxes finally arrive. Men scramble to open them, using rifle butts and bayonets to pry open the sealed lids. Too slow. Too late. The Zulu left horn strikes the British right flank. Warriors pour into the gap, their stabbing spears rising and falling. The British line begins to fragment. Some units maintain discipline, forming small squares and fighting back to back. Others break and run. Lieutenant Teignmouth Melville receives orders to save the Queen's colour. He grabs the heavy flagpole and rides toward the Buffalo River. Lieutenant Coghill, seeing his friend in danger, follows to assist him. Behind them, Isandlwana camp becomes a killing ground. What happens next is recorded in Zulu oral histories and the accounts of the handful of survivors. The Zulu warriors, finally in close combat where their spears are most effective, show no mercy. This is traditional Zulu warfare. The enemy must be utterly destroyed. British soldiers fight desperately. Some form small groups and fight to the last man. Others flee toward the Buffalo River, 5 miles away, pursued by Zulu warriors who can run faster than laden soldiers. The camp followers, African drivers, cooks, servants, are killed alongside the soldiers. The battlefield becomes a scene of medieval brutality in the age of industrial warfare. Warriors stab repeatedly with their Iklewa spears, performing the ritual kwaka, disemboweling the dead to release their spirits. Bodies are stripped and mutilated according to Zulu battlefield custom. A handful of British soldiers reach the Buffalo River. The crossing is chaos. Men on horseback plunging into the swollen current, wounded men swept away, Zulu warriors on the banks shooting and stabbing. Melville and Coghill cross the river but are caught on the Natal bank, their exhausted horses unable to climb the steep slope. Zulu warriors kill them both. The Queen's colour falls into the river. Of approximately 100 to 300 men in Isandlwana camp, only about 55 Europeans and 300 African troops escape. It's one of the worst defeats in British military history, more British soldiers dead than at the Battle of Waterloo. When Chelmsford returns to the camp that evening, having finally realized his mistake, he finds a silent horror. Bodies everywhere, wagons looted and burned. The camp flag still flying over a field of corpses. One officer reports seeing Chelmsford's face turn as white as paper when he realizes the magnitude of the disaster. If you appreciate stories like this, the human drama behind history's greatest military encounters, the courage and tragedy of men caught in impossible circumstances, I invite you to subscribe to Not Nostalgic History. We dig deep into the pivotal moments that shaped our world, telling the stories of the people who lived through them with the detail, context, and respect they deserve. Join our community of history enthusiasts. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next documentary. Now, let's return to January 27, 1879. Because even as the disaster at Isandlwana unfolds, another drama begins just 10 miles away, a drama that will become legend. Rorke's Drift is a Swedish mission station and trading post on the Natal side of the Buffalo River. It consists of 2 single-story buildings, the main mission house and a storehouse, along with a few outbuildings and a stone wall. On January 22nd, it serves as a supply depot and hospital for British forces operating in Zululand. The garrison consists of 1 company of the 24th Regiment, about 150 men, of whom 35 are sick or wounded in the makeshift hospital. They're commanded by Lieutenant John Chard of the Royal Engineers, a 31-year-old officer who's been supervising the river crossing, and Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, 33, who commands B Company of the 24th Regiment. Both are relatively junior officers. Neither has seen significant combat. In a few hours, both will be recommended for Britain's highest military honor. At approximately 3:30 p.m., survivors from Isandlwana begin arriving with news of the disaster. Shortly after, lookouts spot Zulu forces approaching, not the main army, but the reserve, approximately 4,000 to 4,500 warriors who've been ordered to cross into Natal and attack the supply depot. Chard and Bromhead face a choice: retreat toward the major British garrison at Helpmacar, 10 miles away, abandoning the sick and wounded, or defend Rorke's drift. They choose to fight. The British soldiers have roughly 2 hours before the Zulus arrive. They work with desperate speed to fortify the position. Using mealie bags, corn sacks, and biscuit boxes, they build walls connecting the two buildings, creating a defensive perimeter roughly 100 yards by 60 yards. Private Henry Hook, who survived the fighting at Isandlwana by being on duty at Rorke's Drift rather than the main camp, joins the frantic work. Men haul bags, stack boxes, knock loopholes in the stone walls of the buildings. The hospital, with 35 patients inside, some delirious with fever, is barricaded from within. Surgeon Major James Reynolds moves among the hospital patients, making terrible calculations. Some men are too sick to move. If the defense fails, they'll be helpless before Zulu spears. As the soldiers work, they can see the Zulu force approaching, a dark mass against the hills, moving with disciplined speed. The war cries carry across the distance. Usuthu, Usuthu! At approximately 4:30 p.m., the Zulus attack. The first assaults, 4,000 Zulu warriors, strike the southern wall of the compound. They've been marching and fighting all day, and unlike at Isandlwana, they face defenders behind improvised fortifications. But they're under orders to take the position, and Zulu discipline demands obedience. The British firepower is devastating at close range. 100 Martini Henry rifles firing into a compact mass of attackers. Warriors fall in heaps. But the Zulus keep coming, reaching the barricades, stabbing over and around them with their spears. This is combat at its most primal. British soldiers fire point blank into Zulu warriors just feet away, then use their rifles as clubs when warriors grab at the barrels. Bayonets clash with spears. Men shout, scream, gasp for breath in the powder smoke that blankets the compound. Private Hook, assigned to defend the hospital, fires through a loophole at warriors trying to break down the doors. He can see their faces clearly. Young men, some barely out of their teens, showing incredible courage as they charge into rifle fire. Between shots, he helps hospital patients escape through improvised holes knocked in the building's rear wall. The first assault fails. The Zulus fall back, leaving dozens of bodies before the barricades, but they regroup and attack again and again. The battle settles into a grinding pattern. Zulu assault, British volley fire, close combat at the barricades, Zulu withdrawal, then another assault. As darkness falls, the battle takes on a nightmarish quality. The Zulus set fire to the hospital's thatched roof. Flames light the battlefield with an orange glow that casts dancing shadows. British soldiers must fight the Zulus at the front of the hospital while simultaneously evacuating patients from the rear. Hook performs acts of incredible bravery, holding a room in the hospital against repeated Zulu attacks, while patients are evacuated through a hole in the wall behind him. He personally rescues several sick men who would otherwise burn to death or fall to Zulu spears. The defenders are forced to abandon the hospital and contract their perimeter to just the storehouse and a small yard. 150 men crowd into an increasingly smaller space as the Zulus press from all sides. Surgeon Reynolds moves among the wounded, bandaging injuries by firelight. performing emergency amputations with Zulu warriors literally at the walls. He's a non-combatant, a doctor, but he picks up a rifle and fights between treating casualties. Private Alfred Henry Hook later describes the scene. The Zulus were all around us, as thick as bees, and their assaults never seemed to stop. We fired until the rifle barrels were too hot to touch. Men's faces were black with powder smoke. We were parched with thirst, but couldn't reach the water supply. Some of the wounded propped themselves against the walls and loaded rifles for others to fire. Everyone fought, the sick, the doctors, the cooks. If we'd failed for even a moment, we'd all have died. The Zulu attacks continue throughout the night, wave after wave crashing against the British position. The defenders' ammunition dwindles. Men fire their last rounds, then pick up rifles from the wounded. Bayonets bend and break. The mealie bag walls are torn apart and rebuilt under fire, but the defense holds. As dawn breaks on January 23rd, the Zulu commanders make a final assessment. They've lost approximately 350-400 warriors killed and perhaps 500 wounded, nearly 20% of their force. The British position, though smaller, is still intact. The defenders still have ammunition. Zulu scouts report British reinforcements approaching. The Zulu warriors withdraw. The soldiers at Rorke's Drift, exhausted, smoke-blackened, some wounded, all traumatized, watch the enemy fade into the morning mist. They've held. Against overwhelming odds, vastly outnumbered, they've held. Of the 150 defenders, 17 are killed and 15 wounded. The Zulu losses are proportionally far higher. When the relief column arrives hours later, they find the defenders still at their posts, surrounded by spent cartridge cases and Zulu bodies, the buildings still smoldering. The contrast with Isandlwana is stark. At one battle, overwhelming defeat. At the other, against similar odds, an improbable victory. 11 Victoria Crosses will be awarded for the defense of Rorke's Drift, the most ever awarded for a single action. The battle becomes legendary in British military history, celebrated in paintings, books, and eventually film. It transforms a day of catastrophic defeat into a narrative of heroic British resistance. But the war is far from over. News of Isandlwana reaches London in mid-February. The reaction is shock and fury. The British public, accustomed to easy colonial victories, cannot comprehend how savages armed with spears could destroy a British force equipped with modern rifles and artillery. The press demands vengeance. Political opponents attack Disraeli's government for allowing the situation to develop, but mostly there's a sense of wounded pride. The British Army doesn't lose to indigenous warriors. This must be avenged. Reinforcements pour into Natal, 2 full regiments of cavalry, additional infantry battalions, artillery batteries, Gatling guns. The British Empire mobilizes its military might to crush the Zulu kingdom. Lord Chelmsford, his reputation in tatters, requests permission to finish the war before being relieved of command. The government, needing a victory to offset the disaster, grants his request, but sends General Sir Garnet Wolseley to replace him. Chelmsford knows he has limited time to redeem himself. The Zulu victory at Isandlwana is celebrated throughout the kingdom. Warriors return home with captured rifles, uniforms, and equipment. The myth of British invincibility is shattered. Surely now the British will negotiate, will recognize Zulu strength and agree to peace terms. But King Cetshwayo understands the larger strategic picture better than his warriors. He knows that Britain can and will send more troops. The Zulu kingdom has won a battle but is losing the war. The Zulu casualties? Perhaps 3,000 killed at Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift combined, with hundreds more wounded, represent losses the kingdom cannot easily replace. Cetshwayo sends peace overtures. He offers to return captured weapons and equipment. He suggests negotiation. He tries desperately to find a diplomatic exit from a war he never wanted. The British refuse. There will be no negotiation with savages who killed British soldiers. There will be only conquest. The second invasion, Chelmsford reorganizes his forces with painful lessons learned. This time, no more divided columns. All camps will be fortified with lagers of wagons. Scouts and reconnaissance will be improved. Ammunition will be readily accessible. Forces will stay concentrated. On May 31st, 1879, a new British invasion force crosses into Zululand. It numbers approximately 17,000 men, heavily reinforced with cavalry and artillery. They advance slowly, methodically, fortifying every camp, sending out aggressive patrols, refusing to be surprised again. The Zulus try to replicate their Isandlwana success. On June 1st, approximately 7,000 warriors attack a British force at Ngingindlovu. But this time, the British are in a fortified laager. The Martini Henry rifles and artillery pieces cut down the Zulu attack before it can reach the British lines. The Zulus lose about 700 warriors while inflicting minimal British casualties. The pattern repeats throughout June. Zulu attacks on fortified British positions result in heavy casualties for minimal gain. British firepower, when properly deployed behind defenses, proves devastatingly effective. The Zulu military system, so effective at Isandlwana, cannot overcome the tactical adjustments the British have made. July 4th, 1879, Ulundi Chelmsford's force camps just a few miles from Ulundi, the Zulu capital. The climactic battle everyone has anticipated since the war began is finally at hand. King Cetshwayo assembles his army for one final stand. Approximately 15,000 to 20,000 warriors, the remnants of the regiments that fought at Isandlwana and subsequent battles. They're brave, they're determined, but they're also exhausted from months of warfare and demoralized by repeated defeats against fortified British positions. Chelmsford has 4,166 British soldiers and 958 African auxiliaries. He also has 12 artillery pieces and 2 Gatling guns. More importantly, he has a plan refined by painful experience. On the morning of July 4th, the British force forms a massive hollow rectangle. Infantry on all 4 sides, artillery and cavalry inside. It's a moving fortress bristling with rifles and cannon. Chelmsford deliberately positions his force in the open, inviting the Zulu attack he wants. The Zulus, seeing the British in the open rather than behind fortifications, believe they finally have the opportunity for another Isandlwana. The warriors advance in their traditional formation, horns, chest, and loins. It's exactly what Chelmsford wants. The Zulu army sweeps across the plain in waves of shields and spears. It's a magnificent, terrifying sight. Thousands of warriors in perfect formation, chanting war cries, moving with coordinated precision. British artillery opens fire at extreme range. Shells burst among the Zulu ranks. Warriors fall in clusters, but the formations keep coming. At 600 yards, the Martini Henry rifles open fire. 4 sides of the rectangle simultaneously unleashing volley fire into the Zulu attack. The sound is like continuous thunder. The Gatling guns add their mechanical chatter, firing 400 rounds per minute into the packed Zulu formations. The slaughter is horrific. Zulu warriors display incredible courage, advancing into a literal storm of lead and steel. Some reach within 30 yards of the British lines before falling. But courage cannot overcome mathematics. Every yard of advance costs dozens of lives. The Zulu attack breaks. Warriors who survived Isandlwana, who thought they knew what British firepower meant, have never experienced anything like this concentrated, professional, systematic killing. The formations dissolve. Warriors retreat, leaving hundreds of bodies on the field. British cavalry, lancers who've waited impatiently for this moment, charge from the formation's interior, pursuing the retreating Zulus and cutting down hundreds more. The Battle of Ulundi lasts less than 1 hour. The Zulu army is shattered. British casualties are 10 killed and 87 wounded. Zulu casualties are estimated at 1,500 killed, with perhaps an equal number wounded. Lord Zulu Chelmsford, the young warrior who fought at Isandlwana, survives Ulundi but is badly wounded. He watches the warrior kingdom he's known his entire life crumble. The old ways, the traditions of Shaka, the independence of the Zulu people, all are dying on this field under British guns. The burning of Ulundi. After the battle, Chelmsford orders Ulundi burned. The Zulu capital, the administrative heart of the kingdom, the residence of the king, the symbol of Zulu power, goes up in flames. It's a deliberate act of destruction intended to break Zulu resistance psychologically. King Cetshwayo flees into the wilderness. For months he evades British patrols, moving from hiding place to hiding place, hoping his people can continue resistance. But the kingdom is broken. The military system is shattered. British troops roam Zululand freely, imposing their authority. On August 28, 1879, British cavalry finally capture Cetshwayo. The last independent Zulu king is taken into custody, and with him, Zulu independence dies. The Anglo-Zulu War costs approximately British 1,300 killed, including colonial troops. Zulu, 6,000, 8,000 killed, with thousands more wounded. But the casualties don't tell the full story. The Zulu kingdom is dismembered. The British don't annex it immediately. Instead, they divide it into 13 chieftaincies, deliberately fragmenting Zulu political power. The military system that made the kingdom strong is banned. Traditional governance is destroyed. Cetshwayo is exiled to Cape Town. He's eventually allowed to travel to London, where he becomes a celebrity curiosity. The savage king who defeated British forces. He meets Queen Victoria and pleads his case to British politicians and the public. His eloquence and dignity impress many observers, leading to a brief restoration attempt in 1883. But by then, the political situation in Zululand has become so fractured that Cetshwayo cannot reassert control. He dies in 1884. Possibly poisoned, a broken king of a broken kingdom. The British soldiers return home to mixed receptions. Those who fought at Rorke's Drift are lionized. Chelmsford is quietly retired, his career ending not in triumph but in the shadow of Isandlwana. Despite his victory at Ulundi, the common soldiers receive no parades, just their regular pay and the knowledge that they survived. Professor Sarah Mahlangu of the University of KwaZulu-Natal provides important context. We must understand the Anglo-Zulu War as part of Britain's larger project of conquering and controlling southern Africa. The Zulu kingdom was an obstacle to British economic and political domination of the region. The war wasn't about legitimate grievances or defensive necessity. It was about removing an independent African power that stood in the way of British imperial ambitions. The war's timing is significant. It occurs during the scramble for Africa, when European powers are rapidly colonizing the continent. Between 1870 and 1914, European nations will claim control over nearly all of Africa. The Zulu kingdom's defeat is part of this larger pattern. Indigenous states, no matter how well organized or militarily capable, cannot resist European industrial power indefinitely. But the Anglo-Zulu War also reveals the limits of European superiority. At Isandlwana, Zulu warriors armed primarily with spears defeated British soldiers with modern rifles. This happened not because the Zulus had better weapons, but because they had better tactics, better intelligence, better use of terrain, and were fighting for their homeland. Dr. James Mitchell of Oxford University notes, Isandlwana is one of the most important battles in colonial military history because it demonstrates that European technological superiority was never absolute. Given the right circumstances, poor British deployment, overconfidence, tactical errors, even a spear-armed force could defeat a modern army. This terrified European colonial powers, and led to changes in how they approached colonial warfare. The Anglo-Zulu War's legacy extends far beyond 1879. For Britain, the war becomes a cautionary tale about underestimating opponents and the dangers of overconfidence. Isandlwana is studied in British military academies as an example of catastrophic tactical failure. Rorke's drift, conversely, becomes a celebrated example of British courage and determination, its mythology sometimes obscuring the broader context of an unjust imperial war. For the Zulus, the war marks the end of independent Zulu statehood, but also becomes a source of cultural pride. The fact that Zulu warriors defeated the British Army, even temporarily, becomes an important part of Zulu identity. The war is remembered in oral histories, songs, and cultural practices. When South Africa eventually gains independence and later transitions to majority rule, the Zulu kingdom's resistance to British imperialism becomes part of the broader narrative of African resistance to colonialism. For military history, the war demonstrates the transition point between traditional and modern warfare. It shows both the devastating effectiveness of industrial-age weapons and the continued importance of morale, tactics, and leadership. The battles are studied for lessons in logistics, fortification, intelligence gathering, and combined arms warfare. Lieutenant John Chard and Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, the defenders of Rorke's Drift, both received the Victoria Cross. Chard continues his engineering career and dies of cancer in 1897 at age 49, remembered as a hero. Bromhead serves in various garrison posts and dies in India in 1891 at age 45 from typhoid fever. Private Henry Hook receives the Victoria Cross for his actions at Rorke's Drift. He serves out his military career and then works at the British Museum. He dies in 1905, age 56. A decorated veteran who rarely spoke about the nightmarish battle that made him famous. Mehloka Zulu Cetshwayo, the Zulu warrior, survives the war and lives into the 20th century. He becomes one of the most important sources for Zulu perspectives on the war, speaking to historians and preserving oral accounts of the battles. He witnesses his kingdom's destruction, brief restoration, and final absorption into British South Africa. He dies in the early 1900s, one of the last warriors of the old Zulu kingdom. King Cetshwayo never sees his kingdom restored. He dies in 1884, officially from a heart attack, though many suspect poison. He's buried according to Zulu customs, a king without a kingdom, a ruler who tried desperately to avoid a war he knew he couldn't ultimately win. Lord Chelmsford returns to Britain in 1880. He faces no official punishment for Isandlwana. The blame is spread among various officers, most of whom are conveniently dead. He serves in various ceremonial positions and dies in 1905 at age 78. His obituaries mention both Ulundi and Isandlwana, the victory and the defeat forever linked. Standing at the Isandlwana battlefield today, you can see the sphinx-shaped mountain rising above the plain. Cairns of white-painted stones mark where British soldiers fell. A memorial lists the names, hundreds of them, young men from across the British Empire who died in a war that served no defensive purpose, that was provoked by bureaucrats pursuing imperial ambitions. A few miles away at Rorke's Drift, the mission station has been rebuilt. A museum displays artifacts from the battle. Bent bayonets, Martini Henry cartridges, fragments of the mealie bags used to build the barricades. Tour guides tell the story of incredible British courage against overwhelming odds. Both narratives are true. Both are also incomplete. The Anglo-Zulu War teaches us several profound and sometimes uncomfortable lessons. First, that courage exists on all sides of conflict. The British soldiers at Rorke's Drift who fought through the night displayed incredible bravery. So did the Zulu warriors at Isandlwana who charged into rifle fire, knowing they might die. So did Private Hook defending hospital patients, and so did Mehloka Zulu advancing against modern weapons to defend his kingdom. Courage is a human quality, not the possession of any particular nation or cause. Second, the technological superiority guarantees nothing. The British had better weapons, but at Isandlwana, poor tactics, overconfidence, and bad logistics led to catastrophic defeat. The Zulus won that battle not through superior weapons, but through superior tactics, intelligence, and morale. At Ulundi, the situation reversed. British tactical improvements made their technological advantages decisive. Technology matters, but so does how it's used. Third, that wars are easier to start than to end justly. Sir Bartle Frere manufactured a crisis to provoke a war he wanted for imperial reasons. Once started, that war took on a logic of its own. Thousands died. A kingdom was destroyed. None of the deaths or destruction served a legitimate defensive purpose. They served only the expansion of British power. Fourth, that the human cost of empire was borne by ordinary people on both sides. The young British soldiers who died at Isandlwana weren't scheming imperialists. They were working-class men serving for regular pay who died following orders. The Zulu warriors who died at Ulundi weren't mindless savages. They were brave men defending their homeland against invasion. The real villains were the political leaders who created the crisis and the imperial system that treated African independence as an obstacle to be removed. Finally, that resistance matters even in defeat. The Zulu kingdom was ultimately conquered, but the Zulu people's resistance preserved something essential: a sense of identity, dignity, and pride that survived colonialism. When South Africa eventually ended apartheid and became a democracy, the memory of Zulu resistance to British imperialism became part of the foundation for African political consciousness. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 represents a moment when two worlds collided: the world of European industrial imperialism and the world of African independent kingdoms. The collision was never between savagery and civilization, as Victorian British liked to claim, but between two sophisticated societies with different technologies, different social organizations, and incompatible visions of Southern Africa's future. The British vision prevailed, as European visions would prevail across nearly all of Africa by 1914. But the Zulu resistance, brief, ultimately unsuccessful, yet fierce and skillful, stands as testament to a fundamental truth: that the colonized did not simply submit to colonization. They fought. They resisted. They made the colonizers pay in blood for every mile of conquered territory. The cost of that resistance was terrible. Thousands of Zulu warriors died. Their kingdom was destroyed. Their political independence was lost for over a century. But they fought, and in fighting, they preserved something that mere survival without resistance could not have preserved: their dignity, their story, their place in history as agents of their own fate rather than passive victims. Dr. Mahlangu, again. When we teach the Anglo-Zulu War to students today, we emphasize that this wasn't a story of inevitable European triumph over African primitiveness. This was a story of a well-organized African state that nearly defeated a European invasion, that won the war's largest battle, and that only fell after the full weight of British imperial power was brought to bear. The Zulu kingdom was conquered, but it was never defeated in spirit. That distinction matters. The battles of 1879 echo through more than a century of South African history. The courage shown by Zulu warriors becomes part of Zulu cultural identity and later feeds into African nationalism during the anti-apartheid struggle. The memory of British conquest contributes to Africana and British tension in South Africa, playing a role in the politics that eventually produce apartheid. But there's also reconciliation in the memory. Today, the battlefields of the Anglo-Zulu War are shared heritage sites where both Zulu and British descendants can honor their ancestors' courage while acknowledging the tragedy and injustice of the conflict. The Isandlwana Memorial includes both British and Zulu names. The museum at Rorke's Drift tells both sides of the story. This represents a mature engagement with difficult history, acknowledging that courage and tragedy existed on both sides, while also recognizing that the war itself was fundamentally unjust, provoked by British imperial ambitions rather than legitimate grievances. What should we take from the Anglo-Zulu War as we face our own challenges more than 140 years later? Perhaps this: that the strong do not always prevail simply because they are strong, that justice matters more than power, that ordinary people, when fighting for their homes and freedom, can achieve extraordinary things, that technological superiority is not moral superiority, that the cost of war is always borne most heavily by those who have the least say in starting it. We should remember that at Isandlwana, young British soldiers died needlessly in a war their political leaders provoked for imperial gain. We should remember that at Ulundi, Zulu warriors died defending a kingdom that had harmed no one but stood in the way of British expansion. We should remember that at Rorke's Drift, men on both sides displayed courage that transcended the unjust cause that brought them to battle. Most of all, we should remember that history is made by human beings, individuals with names, families, hopes and fears, not by abstract forces or inevitable processes. Lieutenant Coghill choosing to ride back and help his friend. Mehloka Zulu advancing into rifle fire because his kingdom called. Private Hook defending hospital patients at risk of his own life. King Cetshwayo trying desperately to avoid a war he knew would destroy his people. These individual choices, multiplied across thousands of people on both sides, created the history we study. They remind us that we too make choices that shape history, that our actions matter, that courage and principle and resistance to injustice are always possible even in the darkest circumstances. The sun sets early over the Zululand hills in winter, casting long shadows across the battlefields where so much blood was spilled. The land has healed. Grass grows over the mass graves. The buildings at Rorke's Drift have been rebuilt. Life continues, as it always does, but the memory remains. The lessons remain. That empire is always costly, and the cost is paid primarily by ordinary people. That courage is universal, found in all peoples and all causes. That resistance to injustice, even unsuccessful resistance, preserves human dignity in ways that submission never can. That we should honor the brave while questioning the causes for which they fought. The British soldiers who died at Isandlwana deserved better than to die in an unjust war provoked by imperial ambition. The Zulu warriors who died at Ulundi deserved to live free in their own kingdom, undisturbed by foreign conquest. Neither got what they deserved. That's the tragedy. But both fought with courage. Both left behind stories that still inspire. Both remind us that when we're tested, when circumstances push us to our limits, human beings are capable of extraordinary bravery, sacrifice, and determination. The Anglo-Zulu War was brief, just 6 months from invasion to conclusion, but its echoes continue. In the museums and monuments of South Africa, in the histories taught in schools, in the oral traditions of Zulu communities, in the regimental traditions of British Army units, and in the fundamental questions it raises about power, justice, courage, and the human cost of empire. These questions don't have simple answers. History rarely does. But asking them, grappling with them, learning from the past, even when that past is uncomfortable, this is how we honor those who came before us. This is how we avoid repeating their mistakes while preserving their courage. The warriors of 1879, British and Zulu, officers and ordinary soldiers, the famous and the forgotten, fought for causes they believed in or were ordered to support. They displayed courage that still amazes. They died in their thousands for reasons that seem clearer to us now than they could have seemed then. We cannot bring them back. We cannot undo the injustice of the war or restore the Zulu kingdom or resurrect the British soldiers buried beneath African soil. But we can remember. We can learn. we can ensure that their stories, all their stories from all sides, are told with honesty, complexity, and respect. That is what we owe the past, and what we owe ourselves. This has been a presentation of Not Nostalgic History, where we explore the past not as a simple story of heroes and villains, but as the complex human drama it actually was. The Anglo-Zulu War reminds us that history is made by individual choices in impossible circumstances, that courage exists on all sides of conflict, and that the human cost of empire was real and terrible. May we learn from their sacrifice, honor their courage, and build a world where such conflicts become relics of history rather than templates for the future.